Welcome to the Insight Meditation Community of Charlotte. My name is Ward Simmons. I'm one of the 5 Dharma leaders that rotate responsibility for leading on Wednesday nights. If we were meeting in person right now, we would invite you to turn and speak to somebody close to you. Some of you have your video off, and if you are willing to turn it on, it might be pleasing to just scroll around and see who's with us tonight. Just kind of say hello to our Sangha mates. And if you're in your pajamas, you don't have to turn it on. So, as you may know, we are in the middle of a weekly series on the 5 hindrances to meditation. Last week, Debbie introduced us to the topic, and she spoke about the first hindrance, which is sensual desire. Tonight, I'll be taking a look at the second hindrance, which is aversion. And then for the next 3 weeks, we'll address sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry, and doubt. So I'd like to begin by just taking a few minutes to look at what is aversion? What does it mean when we say the hindrance of aversion? So there can be a little confusion because there are different terms used for this. Some teachers refer to it as aversion, others as ill will. So when you hear those two terms in the context of the hindrances, those are synonymous. And it also has a very close relationship to anger. And so in the context of the hindrances, you might hear anger discussed kind of as a part of the hindrance of aversion. So there's a generic term, there's a term that I like to use, and it feels more generic, and it is the term dislike. Instead of aversion, I'll probably use the word dislike most of the evening, but it means the same thing. And just as a contrast to last week, the first hindrance of sensual desire is about liking, and the second of aversion is about disliking. So it can be easy to see the big instances of disliking. You know, when we lose a job, or when a relationship ends, or when a loved one dies, we experience intense dislike. But hopefully for most of us, those big instances don't come so often. And if we wait for those big instances to practice with aversion or dislike, we miss a lot of great opportunities. There's more dislike in our lives than we sometimes recognize. So much more prevalent and accessible are the small, everyday instances that kind of fall below the radar screen sometimes. Like having a scratchy throat and needing to drink water while you're talking. So as I wrote this talk, the arm of my desk chair had cracked plastic on it, and it hurts my elbow when I lean on it, but I haven't taken the time to get it fixed. I've needed a haircut for a week, and every time I look in the mirror, I'm reminded of that. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of seeing political ads on television. When I approach a traffic signal, it changes and and I have to stop, even though I don't feel like I have the time. There's not quite enough light here for me to read this talk, but if I put the right amount of light here for my reading, then the image on Zoom is not very good. And I'm always aware that our youngest dog could break into a barking fit at any moment while I'm speaking on Zoom. So these are all the little tiny aversion or disliking moments that are available to us. Life is really, can feel like a rapid fire alternation between experiences that we like and experiences that we dislike. And as we begin to recognize the pervasiveness of our disliking, then we have the good fortune to be able to begin to work with this dynamic. So I think it's important to define aversion or dislike as a mind state. And like all mind states, it comes and goes. And like all mind states, unless we're paying pretty careful attention, we may not recognize that we are lost in a mind state. Now, and all 5 of the hindrances are mind states. So here's what some contemporary teachers have to say about these hindrances. Philip Moffitt says that the hindrances cloud the mind and prevent us from knowing the cause of our suffering. And hold that thought of suffering, because we're going to be coming back to that topic. Richard Shankman says, the hindrances are unwholesome forces that hinder or obstruct our clarity and equanimity. And Theravadan monk Bhikkhu Analayo says, under the influence of the hindrances, one is unable to understand one's own good or that of others. So you can probably see there's a thread here, a mind that is clouded, obstructed, and not able to understand. So Shankman goes on to say, by their very nature, the hindrances tend to undermine the clarity we need to deal with them effectively. So it's a catch-22. We need the clarity, the hindrance obstructs the clarity, and because we don't have the clarity, it's hard to deal with the hindrance. He goes on to say, we tend to become caught up in sense desire, ill will, agitation, dullness, or doubt. So our ability to recognize these states when they occur and to discern a skillful course of action is impaired. So it can be useful to make connections among various insight meditation teachings so that we begin to get a sense of the entire body and how they're related, rather than just as a random collection. Now, if you're relatively new to this practice, some of these other teachings may be unfamiliar to you. And so for the next couple of minutes, I'm just going to quickly address 4 of them. For the next couple of minutes, just take what is useful to you and leave the rest. So some of you are familiar with the Satipatthana Sutta. That's the Buddha's teaching on the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And while the hindrances are explicitly included as part of the 4th foundation, that is contemplation of Dhammas, they also have a close relationship to the 3rd foundation, which is contemplation of mind states. Another is they are closely associated with the 6th factor on the Noble Eightfold Path, that is right effort. And just to review, the 4 great efforts spoken about in right effort are having to do with mind states. Number 1, preventing the arising of the unwholesome. Number 2, abandoning the unwholesome once they have arisen. Number 3, cultivating the arising of the wholesome. And number 4, sustaining the wholesome once they have arisen. So a third connection is the connection to the Four Noble Truths. So again, I'm just going to review those in case you don't know them or they're not familiar. The first is dukkha, that is unsatisfactoriness or suffering, I mentioned a moment ago, is part of this human experience. There is a cause for dukkha, and the cause is clinging or attachment. To the extent that we can release our clinging or attachment, we will reduce or eliminate our dukkha, our suffering. And there is a step-by-step path we can follow to reduce or eliminate dukkha, and that's the Noble Eightfold Path. Now, the connection here to draw is that when we experience dislike, we're attaching to the way that we want things to be, or more precisely, the way we want them not to be. So when we can see dislike simply as a form of attachment, then the cause and effect relationship is clearer. Attaching to the way we want things not to be yields dukkha, and relinquishing that attachment yields relief from dukkha. Now, the fourth teaching to connect to is, and this is very specific to dislike or aversion, is the teaching on metta or loving kindness. And you may know this is the first of the 4 Brahma Viharas or divine abodes. And I'll say more about metta in just a few minutes. So the point is, as you work with dislike, look to the third foundation of mindfulness and to the 6th path factor and to the 4 Noble Truths and to the practice of metta for additional guidance and direction. So how do we work with our tendency to dislike? Let's listen to the Buddha's words on disliking or aversion from the Satipatthana Sutta. If aversion is present in her, she knows there is aversion in me. If aversion is not present in her, she knows there is no aversion in me. And she knows how unarisen aversion can arise, how arisen aversion can be removed, and how a future arising of aversion can be prevented. So when I listen to this sutta, to these particular words, I hear 2 main tasks for us. The first is recognition, recognizing when dislike is present and recognizing when it's absent. And the second is investigation. When dislike is arising, observing its arising, its removal, and its prevention. So in that context, recognition and investigation, I'm just going to read this little part of the sutta one more time. If aversion is present in her, she knows there is aversion in me. If aversion is not present in her, she knows there is no aversion in me. So that's the recognition. And she knows how unarisen aversion can arise, how arisen aversion can be removed, and how a future arising of aversion can be prevented. So that's the investigation. Before we begin meditation, the task of recognition might sound pretty simple, but the truth is far from that. Being unaware of our mind states, not recognizing our mind states, is very prevalent. And even accomplished nuns and monks have to deal with difficulty recognizing mind states. So this is a story from a sutta. This is about 2 of the Buddha's noted followers, students, monks, Anuruddha and Sariputta. Anuruddha, complaining to his friend Sariputta, complained that despite concentrative attainments, unshaken energy, and well-established mindfulness, he was not able to break through to full realization. In reply, Sariputta pointed out that Anuruddha's boasting of concentration attainments was nothing but a manifestation of conceit. His unshaken energy was simply restlessness, and his concern about not yet having attained awakening was just worry. Helped by his friend to recognize these as hindrances, Anuruddha was soon able to overcome them and achieve realization. So don't despair if you find it challenging to recognize when you're lost in dislike. It happens to all of us. By strengthening our awareness of the presence of disliking, we are turning the obstacle of meditation, the disliking that's interfering, we're turning it into the object of our attention. Now we're attending to the dislike, the experience of dislike. And this really, when we attend in this way, this is the practice of mindfulness. In particular, the mindfulness of mind states. One ally in recognizing dislike is the body. So often one can begin to identify patterns of sensation that are associated with specific hindrances. For me, when I feel profound dislike, it shows up as an almost hollow feeling in my gut. And as I've become more attuned to this, I can feel it coming earlier and earlier. I can feel it when it's not quite as strong. And it causes me to say, wait a minute, I think I've got some dislike or some aversion going on here. So that's useful to me. So it can be easy to focus on which hindrance is present, but an equally important part of the recognition practice is to know the absence of hindrances. So when disliking is not present, if we're not careful, we won't acknowledge disliking is not present. But by recognizing it, we give the mind some relief from a constant practice of recognizing unwholesome states, and to see that there are plenty of times when disliking is not present can lift up the spirits, and it can provide us with encouragement. So that's a little bit about recognition. Now, let's talk about investigation. Once we can recognize the presence or the absence of disliking, we're in a position to undertake investigation. And this is where we each have to learn what's true for ourselves. I can't tell you what your investigation is going to reveal, but I will share with you some kind of conventional wisdom that many people find to be true. You can try it on for size and see if it's true for you. First, often excess focus on disliking is what is referred to as undue attention to the negative. Now, all three of the defilements of greed, hatred, and delusion, the second, hatred, equating to disliking, all three of these defilements are present in all of us to a greater or lesser extent. But most of us have one that's predominant, and it's the one that we give the most undue attention. I'm a good person to give the talk on aversion or disliking because I am the aversive type. And what this means in practice is I have a predisposition to place undue attention on the negative. Now, the remedy is to cultivate a counterbalancing attribute. And the classic counterbalancing attribute for aversive types is metta, or loving kindness practice. And I mentioned earlier, we'd be coming back to that. With metta practice, we intentionally bring to the fore the positive characteristics of situations or individuals. Now, another point to make about investigation, while cultivating this loving kindness for others might feel like an act of generosity toward them, the most important benefits accrue to ourselves. How lucky is that? It has been said that anger toward another is just as if someone wishing to hit another person takes hold of glowing coals. So I'm going to pick up these coals and throw them at the other person, but when I pick them up, I burn my hand. Who suffers there? I was once on a retreat taught by Sylvia Boorstein, and she made the comment, I am always the primary beneficiary of my own goodwill, no matter to whom it is directed. I am always the primary beneficiary of my own goodwill, no matter to whom it is directed. So when we change our hearts by cultivating loving kindness, guess what? We get to be the person who lives with that loving heart that we're developing. One more point about cultivating loving kindness as an antidote to disliking. So it's well established that frequently thinking or dwelling on a particular issue results in a corresponding mental inclination. The more we indulge the disliking, the stronger that tendency becomes. Frequently giving undue attention to disliking is the nourishment for the arising of disliking. Frequently giving wise attention to loving kindness is the de-nourishment of disliking. As we cultivate metta, this becomes the habit of mind, and over time, it becomes easier once this pattern is established and strengthened. So that's probably all I have time to say about metta tonight. A full talk on metta is beyond the scope of this talk, but there are a lot of resources available, and our Wednesday night talks regularly address metta. Occasionally there'll be a talk only on metta, and at the end of each Wednesday night talk, at the end of each Wednesday night session, we end with metta practice. So just to review what we've been talking about tonight, disliking is, it's an opportunity. We can look for it in little tiny moment-to-moment experiences. We want to remember it's a mind state which comes and goes, and we want to understand that it clouds the mind and the ability to see clearly. We talked about a few teachings, 4 teachings that can be useful in dealing with disliking. We talked about working with it, recognition that it's not as easy as it might seem, that we use mindfulness in that recognition, that we can use body awareness in that recognition, and that we want to remember to cultivate an awareness of presence and absence of disliking. And then as to investigation, it is really undue attention to the negative. The classic antidote is metta or loving kindness practice. Cultivating that always benefits ourselves, and it becomes easier over time as it becomes a habit. So I hope those thoughts on the second hindrance of aversion or disliking are useful. We have a few minutes to do questions and answers, and you may know this, but there are 2 ways to pose a question. One is if you want to use the Zoom function of raising your hand, not on the screen, but there's a function in Zoom. If you know how to use it, you can do that. The second option is you can just use the chat function on your screen and chat in a question, and I'll respond to it if I'm able. So let me just get my screen going. Okay. Looks like Babita might have a question.
Thank you, Ward. Thank you for the very nice explanation. My question is, when you mentioned that if aversion is absent, we need to be aware of it. Why should I be aware if aversion is absent? If there is, I mean, maybe I'm not understanding it, but if there is no aversion, that's great. I don't have a dislike, but why do I need to be particularly aware of it? Because if aversion is there, I'm going to look for some body sensations, right? That aversion is there. If it's not there, then hopefully something else is there, some other hindrance is there or whatever.
So thank you, Babita, for that question. I think one answer to your question is that it can support us and inspire us to see that we aren't constantly dwelling in all these hindrances. It can support us to see that sometimes we are successful and the hindrances are being kept at bay. And that's important to know so that we don't get overwhelmed by always looking at the negative. Another answer is it's accurate. If disliking is absent and I fail to perceive that, then I'm not fully understanding my mind state. So it's good to know exactly what's true, and the absence of aversion is what's true in that moment. So thank you for your question. I only have a little bit of aversion to sitting here quietly, waiting to see if anybody else is going to ask a question. I don't have very much. Sitting quietly is a pretty good thing to do. All right. Seems like everybody who wanted to say anything or ask a question has done so. So maybe we'll move on to announcements. So this Saturday, there will be a cleanup event at Freedom Park from 9 to 12 for folks to help clean up the greenway. It'll be, everybody will meet at Freedom Park and then moving through the greenway to clean up. There's still time to sign up if you'd like to do that. It'll also be an opportunity to be outdoors, social distance, and be with Sangha members. Information's on the website, and you can contact Gail Goforth about that. She's leading that. On the 14th of November, there will be a volunteer event with Second Harvest Food Bank, and the contact is Laura DeFria, and if I understand correctly, her contact information is on the website about that article, about that event. Anything else that's coming up will be noted on the website, so check the website regularly. One thing to point out is that in addition to this 7:30 Zoom session, we have a different 7 o'clock Zoom session. And that is an instruction period. And if we were in person, we would grab you by the arm and kind of tug you over that way and encourage you to go to the instruction period if you're relatively new. But we can't do that here on Zoom. So I'm doing it now, encouraging you to take advantage of that. We like to say that we encourage people to go to the instruction period, their first 4 visits, but you're not limited to 4 visits. You can come as often as you like. So remember that there is a Dharma leader sitting there at 7 o'clock every Wednesday in a different Zoom session, waiting to answer your questions and give you instruction. Are there any meditation related announcements that are not IMC Charlotte? Okay. We thank all the people who volunteer to make this happen. It might not seem like it would take much. I can tell you it takes a great deal, and all the people who set up our Zoom sessions and manage the recordings and all the communication around it, it's quite a commitment, and we're receiving the benefit of their generosity when we participate. If you would like to support this community financially by practicing dana or generosity, you can do that also on the website. And with that, we will move to, guess what? Metta, or loving kindness practice. Oh, wait. So it looks to me like Thea has an announcement.
Thanks, Ward. Just a quick announcement about from Denise. She had to sign off early. She says, some of you have heard that Park Road Baptist Church has reopened its campus as of October 20th with limited return of its community in adhering to the North Carolina COVID guidelines. The IMC leadership, the board, and the Dharma leaders are scheduled to meet November 1st to discuss our reopening plans and concerns. We do not intend to resume activities at Park Road Baptist before January 1st of 2021, and only then if it is safe, manageable, and reasonable. So we'll communicate any changes in the newsletter and on the website and via social media to keep you in the loop. And also the Sangha survey is going to be available mid-November, so you can comment or put thoughts in that survey and they'll all be read. And so more information will follow as soon as we have it. And that is from Denise with Metta and sympathetic joy for your well-being. Thanks.
Thanks, Thea. So I have one more message here, and I can't tell who it's from. It says Zoom user, but it says I have an announcement, but I don't know how to raise my hand. So let me just see if this will work. If you are the Zoom user who has an announcement, doesn't know how to raise your hand, if you'll just do this, I'll try to see if I can see you. If you don't have your video on, of course, that's not going to work. Ah, okay, worked.
Unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is this right? I just thought people might be interested in knowing about this. I remember 4 years ago on the Wednesday, during the Wednesday meeting after the election, you spoke very eloquently, I might add.
Good.
And that meeting was a great comfort to me. It was really a wonderful gathering. And I learned recently that the Insight Meditation Society is having a 2-hour, this is the one in Barre, Massachusetts, is having a 2-hour pre-election night event, online event, a meditation and talk to just help people sort of maintain equanimity and perspective and, you know, all that. And it's $5. And I thought some people might be interested in checking that out. And I'm signed up. So that's it.
Great.
Go to the Insight Meditation Society if on their website, if that's of interest.
Great. Thank you, Margaret.
Sure.
Okay, so we'll move to our loving kindness practice now. So you can just find a comfortable posture for the next few moments. And I'll just invite you, if there's any being that you're aware of that you particularly want held in loving kindness tonight, just bring the name of that being to your mind, being or beings. And we begin our practice always with ourselves. I'll offer phrases that you can repeat silently to yourself. May I be safe from inner and outer harm. May I be happy and content. May I be healthy in body and mind. And may I live a life of well-being, free from suffering. Then turning our attention to another being or beings. You might want to visualize them, bring an image to mind, and we'll include here all of the beings that any of us brought to mind a moment ago when I asked you to do so. May you be safe from inner and outer harm. May you be happy and content. May you be healthy in body and mind. And may you live a life of well-being, free from suffering. And now, broadening our loving kindness or our metta practice out to encompass all beings everywhere. May all beings be safe from inner and outer harm. May all beings be happy and content. May all beings be healthy in body and mind. And may all beings, without exception, live lives of well-being, free from suffering. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight, and have a lovely rest of your evening.